Welcome to Parenting Adventures. We help parents empower their kids to build a growth mindset so they can tackle any size challenge that school and life can throw at them. From grades to bullying and struggles at home and school, and everything in between. Whether you're in the elementary alphabet stage or navigating high school credits, we're diving into how you can relate and influence positive action. Stick around for real solutions, expert tips, and stories that resonate and inspire. Ready for personalized mindful tutoring? Head to tutorteach.ca/tutoring to see how our 9 cornerstones to success have helped over 3,000 students achieve their goals. Now, let's dig into the episode.
Divorce and separation can be some of the most challenging experiences a family goes through, especially when children are involved. I'm your host, Lara, and today we're sitting down with Denis Sushkin, a counseling psychologist at the Calgary Counselling Centre. Denis has extensive experience working with clients of all ages and guiding families through difficult circumstances. In this episode, Denis shares his advice on how to navigate divorce, particularly when you have children, from how to approach the conversation and avoid common mistakes, to understanding the emotional reactions kids may have based on their age. We'll also dive into ways parents can provide stability for their kids during and after divorce, tips for managing their own emotions while supporting their children, and practical advice on co-parenting when tensions are high. If you or someone you know is navigating separation, you won't want to miss Denis's expert insights on maintaining healthy family dynamics during these tough times. Denis, welcome to the show. We're so grateful to have you here to tackle such an important and sensitive topic, and one that I know touches so many of the families we work with at Tutor Teach. To start, can you share a bit about your background and what led you to focus on supporting children, youth, and families?
Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to have this conversation. It's such an important and big topic. I work as a counselor full-time at the Calgary Counselling Centre. This is my second career, actually. Before that, I used to be a teacher as well and work with families and kids in a very different capacity. So I'm from Kazakhstan, from Central Asia regional, and I spent like 7 years teaching there. And I moved here and I worked in social services and worked with families in a slightly different role. And then I decided to become a counselor. I've been working in this area for a number of years now. And I was always families, kids were always part of this work for me. I really love working with couples. In general, it's a big passion of mine. And when you work with couples, kids will be in the picture all the time, most of the time.
True. And your background in teaching would lend itself very significantly to this role, because you probably saw the dynamic of different families and whatnot while you were teaching and how that impacted kids during their schooling.
For sure. Yeah. I think kids' well-being is always directly connected with the well-being of the relationship at home and how parents are doing. So the younger the kids are, the more they rely on the adults and the caregivers in their life to be well, to do well in school and life and play, everywhere.
So divorce is never easy, especially when kids are involved. So how should parents approach the conversation when telling their kids about a divorce? And what are some common mistakes to avoid?
And maybe I want to add just a bigger piece to this conversation before directly answering your question, because divorce is a big topic, as we both of us mentioned, and there are so many nuances there. And if people are listening to this podcast, thinking about this kind of question, I think they're already doing a lot, and they're doing as well as they can, I would imagine. And because talking about kids and divorce, a lot of parents always kind of feel a lot of guilt and shame. And am I being a good parent? Is this the right thing? Not the right thing? So just normalizing and having this as a big part of how you talk with kids, or what you do before you talk with kids, is kind of this is hard. This is hard for me. This is hard for my kids, but I am doing a lot. Extending some self-compassion towards yourself, I think, will be a huge part of setting this conversation up for success. So when parents are dealing with a lot and they're starting with what if I'm making a mistake? This kind of makes this whole conversation into a very different kind of conversation. It doesn't go as well as it can go. So making sure that people are aware that this is a big topic. A lot of families are struggling with it. Divorce is not a doesn't have to be automatically be a negative thing. A lot of people struggle with that. Well, if I'm divorcing, I'm messing my kids up. There is something wrong that I'm doing. And divorce can be a success. Some relationships end, and that's fair. This is normal. This happens. And I really like thinking about, ask people to think, how can they create a children-centered divorce as opposed to creating a divorce-centered childhood for kids? And slowing it down, asking yourself, like, okay, so what will be the most important? What do my kids need right now? How can we create an experience in the conversation that will be centered around that? We'll be mindful of what they need at the developmental stages, of being mindful of all the difficulties that parents are dealing with as well.
Do you find that in this day and age, parents are a little bit more open in conversation with their kids and draw them in more? I find that, it's been a bit of a shift in how parents talk to their kids.
I do. And I think this is a never-ending conversation. Things definitely change from 50 years ago, 60 years ago. Things have changed, and parents are way more mindful of, like, how can we talk with parents? How can we be mindful of their emotions? How can we engage them more? What's the appropriate way to engage kids in this kind of like difficult conversation? So definitely, parents are working really hard. Sometimes they work overtime with no benefits and no additional pay. And sometimes in my work, I have to like invite people to like, so are you working as hard as you need to be? You need to work? Do you work harder than it needs to be? Or do you need to work harder? And it's a really hard balance to find.
And parent guilt, like you said, I think the second you become a parent, that guilt that you didn't know before is born with the child. They go hand in hand. So whether you're going down the path of divorce or not, parents are always thinking about how their actions and choices are impacting their children, and there's guilt associated with that.
Yeah, and being mindful and catching yourself in the right moments. Because if you start a conversation about divorce with your kids from a place of like, I'm not a good enough parent, this will color the whole conversation so quickly.
So when parents break the news, I imagine kids react in all sorts of ways depending on their age and personality. What are some typical reactions you've seen from kids of different age groups when they first hear about divorce?
And I think there are a couple of things here. So there are certain things that are depending on the age group, but the reactions themselves are quite often more connected with the families and the relationships that were present before the divorce happened. So I've seen 9-year-old kids were like extremely surprised and devastated, and I've seen 9-year-old kids who were like, "Well, I felt that it's coming a long time ago." So I think the reactions themselves are more connected with what's been going on in the family in the time that led to this whole conversation. And what kind of needs, how can parents respond differently to the kids? I think that would be more connected to the developmental stages and the age of each child. But reactions can be really, really different from like, I've never thought it's coming, it's my fault. It can be a reaction of finally, this will end. This whole tension and conflict that's going on in the family. So that's why divorce itself is not negative by default. How people go through divorce can be more effective, less effective, can be more anxiety inducing, less anxiety inducing for everyone, not just kids. People can get stuck in the separation process for years, but they can find ways to move it along and not get stuck in it.
So parents obviously want to soften the initial blow as much as possible, but also support their kids on an ongoing basis because adjusting to divorce is a journey. What are some things parents can do to provide stability and a sense of normalcy for their kids during and after a divorce?
And that's where thinking about different developmental stages can be helpful, because depending on the age of the child, they will need different kind of support with everything in life. So, and there are slightly different, like there are different ways how people break down, like what are the exact developmental stages or what the different age brackets. But I can start thinking of it like by dividing kids into three basic categories. So 0 to 5, the early childhood stage, that's when kids rely on parents for everything, and they don't have language sometimes to process and explain everything. And in if divorce happens in that stage when the kids are 0 to 5, the parents will have to maybe talk less, but be there for the kids in a more tangible, very kind of like physical way. Sort of like, even if divorce is happening, those kids still need to go through toilet training, sleep training. They still need to hit those milestones, those stones of like going to school for the first time. So having parents who might be dealing with their own things, separating and divorcing, but while still addressing those things, can create like a baseline for kids, like that the kids can feel and sense and see the tangible presence of a parent. Kids who like kind of like middle childhood, like 6 to 12, I think they start to become more independent. They go to school now. They need a different kind of presence everywhere, and also they will need a different kind of support and different kind of scaffolding when the family goes through separation and divorce. Those kids are way more concrete, and they will also be able to talk with parents more. They will start to be able to start to share like maybe what they feel, and parents can engage through play, through some kind of like indirect conversation about what's going on, providing some narrative about what's happening, so people can, again, like depending on your child and what they need, they can be more active participants in this process. And also there are teenagers, adolescents, 13 through 17. That's the age when the main developmental task for those kids is to figure out who they are and how they fit into the world. And when it's a world that's constantly shifting, there are two homes or parents are figuring out what's going on, they will need some help with figuring out who are they, what's going on for them, and how do they fit into the bigger picture. And I think regardless of the age, also kids will need to have some kind of like adult caregiver who will be able to be there with all their emotions, behavior, and be able to provide some kind of narrative. Because without this kind of adult in any kid's life, there are only two default strategies that kids have, and it's either self-blame or self-doubt. It's my fault, or no, I can't be feeling what I'm feeling. There's something wrong with me. It's a silly thing that I'm scared. It's a silly thing that I feel nervous about this change. So parents who can be like, depending on age, but be present and provide, okay, I'm here for you with all the different things that are coming up, while also, again, and that's the complexity, because the parents are rightly and fairly feel enormous pressure, like I need to be there for my kid or kids, and also I need to figure myself out. That's a lot. That's a really heavy burden to have for parents.
They're wearing two hats, and so they have to sort through the divorce itself with their partner, their former partner, and how that impacts their financials and their time and all this and their schedules. And then they still need to be the superhero to their child and, be an active parent. And then also in between all of that, try and find a way to parent cohesively. And that's a tall order. And that's probably why the emotions are so high.
And we're not even saying that they also have to work. They might have one kid, they might have several kids, they might have parents who need their attention, they might have other things happening, they might be starting new relationships with new partners. Like, it's just like, yeah, life's still happening, like it's still happening while this is going on.
Yeah, I think we could, as adults, all say we wish there was a pause button, but there's no pause button. It feels like we're always moving in fast forward. So on that note, we know divorce can be emotionally challenging for everyone involved, obviously for parents. You touched on this briefly before, but how do you recommend parents tend to their own emotions while still being there to support their kids through the process?
There's a common analogy that a lot of therapists use. They talk about those announcements on the plane. before the plane takes off, they always say, well, in the case of the emergency, put your own oxygen mask first before helping anyone else. This is not because people are encouraged to be selfish, but it's like in order to help others, you need to make sure that you are taking care of yourself. And I don't know any parent that doesn't struggle with this, with not knowing how to separate. Am I being selfish or am I taking care of myself? Because when the plane is crashing, that's obvious. But when life happens, it's like, so the time for myself, am I being selfish or am I taking care of myself? So having ways to acknowledge, first of all, that struggle is real and that there needs to be a way to sort out what are the ways that they can take good care of themselves is all important. Having scaffolding around them is also important, be it just other family, friends, people around them who can sometimes, I don't know, like take care of their cat while they're away, or drop off I don't know, like a dish that the whole family can just eat and parents don't need to worry about things. Potentially having professionals in their life who can help them to go, okay, let's sort out, let's see what's going on for you. What's the help that the parents need? Because yeah, the fact that parents, it's inevitable that the conflict will happen when parents separating. It's inevitable that the parents will struggle with their own emotions and everything. So having good ways to take care of that is important. Taking care of just the basic needs, making sure that like, do the parents eat, sleep, just like all the basic needs that are covered. That's another part of it. So I know I'm naming a lot of things that are not directly psychological or emotional. I think that's the foundation. Because if that's not in place, that's really hard to address. I think the biggest emotion is like, yeah, a lot of people feel grief that the relationship is ending, and they can feel both huge relief. Finally, I knew it's not working. I knew it didn't work for a long time, and there is a way out. And at the same time, grieving for themselves that, oh, I never envisioned this relationship to end this way, or I'm grieving this for my kids because now they have to deal with it. It's a real thing, and people often feel both relief and grief, or they feel like I'm moving on and I'm getting stuck. The never-ending guilt and blame, not doing enough for my kids, is also very real. Having ways to address that, and parents need to remember that they sometimes can't pull themselves up with the bootstraps. The main thing that they can do is to find the supports that they can.
Well, it definitely takes a village in most things in life. And like you said, no one gets married with the idea of getting divorced. And so the idea that there's a grievance associated makes perfect sense. Speaking of that village, I was curious, how can younger kids whose parents aren't divorced, how can we explain to them that every family is different, and how can we teach our children to support their friends whose families are going through divorce? You know, my kids are quite young, and they've been asking me recently questions like, why is so-and-so live in 2 different houses? Or, well, why aren't their parents together anymore? Is that going to happen with us? So there's a bit of a fear and a curiosity and an uncertainty. So how do we mitigate those kinds of questions?
Well, and I really appreciate that other angle that you bring in, and it's connected to the earlier question that you asked, like do parents engage or initiate those conversations more these days? Because I think they do, and those are really important conversations. And when kids bring anything up, be it like what you shared, your kids coming in, and I see something outside of our household, outside of our home, I don't know what to make sense of it. Or if kids come to parents who are going through separation, divorce, kind of, hey, I see this, I don't know how to make sense of it. So validating and being curious about those emotions and not shutting them off, but being really curious and open, like, oh, tell me more. What did you see? What goes through your mind? How, like, depending on the age, again, younger kids, it's harder to have a conversation. But like, if your kids are coming to you, that means they're already noticing it. So asking them, like, so what do you see? What do you notice? How do you make sense? Providing some kind of like little explanation of what's possible. You said it really well. I think like, there are a lot of different ways how families look like these days, be it with in relation to separation or divorce. Outside of that, kids learn the best through play and stories. It can be uh, watching something on TV that kind of like reminds you, oh, here's what's happening, and that can be just a conversation starter. I think I'm always amazed when I can like take my son to a library and I can see so many different books on different topics. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. This is such a natural conversation starter. That's how kids learn. Sometimes you don't even need to explain more. They just read a story and that becomes part of their kind of like vocabulary. Oh, that's how the world works.
I love when we can rely on books to help explain when we don't have the words ourselves. It's nice that someone else is able to explain it a little bit better. So, co-parenting is a big topic that comes up after separation. What advice do you have for parents on how to navigate that, especially when emotions are still raw or when there's tension between the parents?
I think that's one of the trickiest questions. And I think that's an important question. I think that it's tricky for me because I don't want to do any kind of disservice because it's really easy for me to talk in general terms. But when I talk in general terms, I inevitably miss a lot of families and a lot of situations. And in my head, I even want to separate like there is separation and divorce when there are high emotions and a lot of questions and arguments and messiness of a divorce. That's just normal. There is no other way through it. Like you cannot have a relationship without having conflict. So people cannot expect that this will not be true about separation. Like, oh, we're separating, we don't need to argue, but it will be. I want to separate just out of sort of like a category of like normal messiness versus messiness with like, because separation can happen because of the domestic violence. Separation can happen because of like a very cruel betrayal. And that's, in my head, it's different. It has a different gravity almost and different level of emotions. So when we talk about just the normal messiness, recognizing that, yeah, the marriage or the relationship is ending, but those two parents or all parents are still need to be co-parents is the first step. And also, ideally, doesn't always happen, but if all parents can ask themselves, so what kind of co-parenting uh, relationship do I want to have? What's our big vision? What's the North Star, let's say, for this? And I think the hardest next question for parents to ask themselves and be very clear about is like, what's required of me to make that happen? So they can be very clear on what's in their control, what kind of co-parent they aspire to be. Because the hardest, I think, and the most common place where people get stuck is if only my co-parents stop doing what they're doing, uh, in order for me not to feel what I feel, that will be like ideal. If only my co-parent, like if only he just like tells me what's going on and tells me when he'll pick up the kids, then I will not be worried about things. So this kind of like, if only they will change so I can be my best version of myself, most common place, the most tempting place to be and to go. And everyone starts there. But if they can find ways and strength and support to move past that gate. So I'm an active part of this relationship. So is there a way for the two of us to sit down and say, okay, here's the kind of co-parents we want to be. Here's the kind of relationship we want to create for our kids. Uh, Again, like this idea of like kids-centered divorce. That's what's required of us. That's what's required of me personally. That's the kind of person I aspire to be. So it's not about, again, good or bad. And in some way, this kind of process is not any different than starting like an exercise routine or learning a language or learning a musical instrument. You make a decision, and all of us like, yeah, I want to do it. That's true. But then it's the day-to-day thing. Well, I know I need to go to the gym. But do I want to? Really? Well, maybe not. It's the same thing. Like, so yeah, I want to be a good co-parent, but here's what's happening, and do I still want to do it or not? That what's required of me? Again, like, what's the my personal individual commitment? So I can be clear on my side of the street and focus on what's in my control as much as possible.
So there's an accountability piece.
Right.
So, in terms of therapy for the parents, for the children, when does that come into play? Is that something that you would suggest for every family that's getting divorced? Would you suggest it just prior to telling your kids about it? After? Like, when do you suggest that parents start considering the therapeutic side of things?
So I'm a bit biased because I'm a therapist. Kind of like I think therapy is good for everyone, and that's totally true. Um, but also again, like there are a lot of details of every single life. I think getting support is always a good idea. Getting the support that's tailored to your family, that's accessible, that's affordable. So some people need less of it, some people need a lot of it. Again, this piece is like, but overall, there's no shame in asking for help. The sooner you can start that process, the better. Everyone struggles with it. This is a messy process. And it's not only about therapy, but like again, like a legal consultation, some kind of mediation. There are a lot of things that can be involved here. So how to move through this process with the right resources, and therapy can be like people can engage in therapy as quickly as early as possible. When couples come to therapy, and I bring up in the first sessions, like, so overall couples come for three main reasons. So they come in to repair the relationship, to make it better. They come in to make a decision, can be a decision to stay together, not to stay together, or to move in together, not to move in together, have kids or not to have kids, any kind of question. And some couples do come into therapy to end the relationship well. And that's also fair. And then there's also a piece of like kids in therapy. And I do have another bias here, but I think because people need a village around them, I think finding some kind of like program for the whole family can be a really good idea. Here, like at the Calgary Counselling Centre, we run the group for families that's called Children of Divorce. We don't recommend families to start the group at least 6 months after everything is settled. After like all the things with lawyers are done, they moved into different places, all the things are settled. But 6 months and later, if both parents and the kid or the kids can come into therapy and do some kind of like program together to learn how to be a family still while co-parenting apart. How can they be still a family when two parents are living in two different places and they have like a week on, week off? I think it's a really good idea. And just they can learn as a family, but also seeing other families go through something similar so they can norm reference. I think parenting is probably one of the loneliest jobs. You can always in your head. You're always in your head, and you're always going to be the first. Oh, I'm the worst parent. Probably all the other parents in the world probably are doing this thing way better than I do. And getting out of that space is crucial. Seeing people, yeah, like worse happens often. Parents go through that, kids go through that, and there's a way to go through it well.
And like you said, it's never a disadvantage to get support. The kids don't even necessarily know what the purpose, the end goal of therapy is, but to have a trusted space, a safe space to share their thoughts and listen to each other and whatnot, I don't see any downfall to that.
Totally, and that gets people out of that like lonely place. Like even your question, like how can your kids engage with kids that they see who are going through this kind of thing? So even like giving them well, invite them over. Here's the thing that you can say. It creates this kind of like sense of connection and a safety net that helps families a lot.
I love that. And I think it's so important for us to teach our kids empathy or sympathy or however that ends up being. And so I love that. Like, why don't you just come on over and let's have a little play date. That's awesome.
Yeah. Or you as a parent reaching out, I know there might be a lot. Why don't your kid come for a sleepover or just an afternoon, and I can feed them, they can play. There's nothing else. And that can be such a can make a huge difference in someone else's day.
Especially because I think people have trouble asking for help. So you really have to be able to read the room and say, if I were in their shoes, I'd probably be struggling with this. So I'm just going to pitch in and see if I can take the load off a little bit. So before we wrap up, where can our listeners reach you or learn more about the Calgary Counselling Centre and the services you provide to families going through difficult transitions like divorce?
We have Calgary Counselling Centre website, and it's a really easy intake form, and people can fill it out online, or they can call the center and someone will help them fill it out. At any time, they will always be connected with the individual counselor who will meet, who will listen to their story, who will identify what the needs are. People don't need to come to therapy with like already knowing what they need to do and how they need to do it. Sometimes they can come in and say, I have no idea what's going on. I don't know what kind of help I need, and someone will listen. So CalgaryCounselingCentre.com will be one. And we also have another initiative that's called Counselling Alberta, when we provide counseling not only for people who live in the Calgary area, but we cover the whole province now. And it's an initiative with the government, and it's quite heavily subsidized. So like the fees for that, because we do want provide supports for people who live in more remote areas and areas outside of Calgary, and Counselling Alberta. We will have another website if people live outside of Calgary as well.
Well, wonderful. I think that this has been, I know we only just scratched the surface, but even just scratching the surface, I think that parents are going to feel seen and heard from this podcast, to know that, like you said, we need to normalize the feelings that come with divorce and not put such a negative twist on it and tone on it, and just find ways to support each other through it and support our kids and whatnot. So thank you so much for sharing about such a deep and dense topic, and with so many nuances. I think you really delivered a good message here.
Thank you. You're welcome. And thank you for asking those questions and opening this conversation up.
And that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks so much for joining us on Parenting Adventures. Remember, you're not alone in this journey, and we're always here to help. Parenting is like trying to fold a fitted sheet. It seems impossible at first, but with enough determination, you can make it work. Kind of. If you're ready for the next step, visit tutorteach.ca/tutoring for personalized mindful tutoring and discover how we've helped over 3,000 students reach their goals. Until next time, keep calm and fold on.